From the Sky News Centre, this is Paul Murray Live.
Thank you, big fella. Yeah, I'm the only one who can do the fat gags around here, for they are about my people. We all remember that by this time last week, the expectation of the Prime Minister was that he was going to go into the history books. Remember Tears in the Sand out the front of Uluru? And then the reality was 60% of the country said not just no, hell no, to the idea of the voice. Now, there's also been a bit of a test here of Albanese and about practical things versus the symbolic, the historic, memorable things versus the things that will actually help people right now. Remember back in January, the out-of-control crime wave that was all over Alice Springs.
The alcohol-fuelled crisis of violence in Alice Springs revives a historical problem.
Alcohol bans will return to Central Australia and support services will receive a $250 million boost in a bid to curb the escalating crime.
High emotions have seen a huge town meeting shut down in Alice Springs. It was organised by local business owners who are considering launching a class action against the Northern Territory government over the town's crime surge.
The Red Centre has captured the country's attention for all the wrong reasons.
He didn't want to talk about it. He dragged his feet, but it was only the intense attention that, among others, we were able to bring to it that forced him to get off his backside and actually go to Alice Springs. But as you know, he took more time flying to Alice Springs than he spent in Alice Springs. The money that he left behind to make Alice Springs safer was just a tenth of the money that he ended up spending on the referendum that we, of course, know Australia voted hell no to. And just to rub it in, just to remind us that when you displease this Prime Minister, he still does not give up on the thing he really wanted to do, regardless of the message that it sends. Remember, a couple of hours that he ends up spending in Alice Springs, 3 days he spent at the tennis immediately following his time in Alice Springs. Well, somebody who is way more invested in the reality of what happens in Alice Springs because she lives there, because she has represented there, because she's been able to communicate the reality, not the spin, from the heart of our country is, of course, the wonderful Senator Jacinta Price. Frequent friend of this program way before she was a senator, and we continue to cheer her in all the way as she continues to barnstorm the country. It was her and Warren Mundine's chief advocacy that meant so many Australians were able to vote no as they did on the weekend. But that means there is a political price to be paid. Just like how the people of Alice Springs got just a moment of the Prime Minister's time before he was off sinking beers and having ice creams at 3 days at the tennis, the revenge has begun against Senator Price. It's happened this evening, and I'm sad I have to report it to you. You see, after the vote, Senator Price went into the Senate today and she asked the Senate to pass a motion demanding that the government has a royal commission into the sexual abuse of Indigenous kids that are happening right now in the middle of the country. Now, this was not an attempt to create a law to force the government. This was a motion for the Senate to agree with the idea. Here's what she said just a couple of hours ago.
I rise today to speak on the urgent need for Prime Minister Albanese and the Labor government to support the Coalition's call for a royal commission into child sexual abuse in Indigenous communities, audit spending on Indigenous programs and support practical policy ideas to improve the lives of Indigenous Australians to help close the gap. For those children in remote communities are most marginalised, suffering sexual abuse, neglect and other abuse. Labor, the Greens, Senator David Pocock have denied our attempts before. You've chosen to be silent and overlook these issues. This is the last time. Join us in what Australians overwhelmingly seek, or we will do it ourselves and hold you all to account.
Now, this is a perfect example where, after the country said no to the voice, to say yes to at least putting the point to the government about a royal commission. But of course, they're not interested in having royal commissions into things that don't investigate the previous government, that aren't all about ways of having a crack at the previous government. How many times have we told you about all the inquiries that are all about blame Morrison, or the inquiries that are about frame Dutton? Well, in the Senate tonight, the Labor Party, the Greens and David Pocock all got together and killed the motion for the Prime Minister to consider this Royal Commission. Now, as we know, his aversion to Royal Commissions include anything that would investigate the states for their roles when it comes to COVID. Well, have a listen to some of the disgraceful stuff that the Labor senators said in the debate before the vote that killed the motion. It is extraordinary. Now, these people assume that because they're in the Senate, nobody's watching. Because it's not going to make the 6 p.m. news, no one will care. Well, we watch everything that Senator Price does, and we watch this debate. This is the Labor Party that has spent how many months pretending to cry in the dirt of Uluru? And when an Indigenous woman from Alice Springs says it's time for a royal commission into what is happening to Indigenous kids, this is a senator from the Labor Party called Tim Ayres. Have a look at this.
I noticed that the relevant organisation in this space in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community, Snake, has said another Royal Commission is not a solution. So another Royal Commission, another inquiry is not a solution. And like many of the interventions by those opposite, this is all about the politics and never about the solution. Always about the politics, never about the solution. And what is this? What is the content?
Order.
What is the content of this contribution and the content of the letter really about? Well, it's really about an angry pursuit of the people that they don't like, who didn't agree with them in the recent referendum.
Previously, the Senate, when the numbers are not in favour of the government, have been able to literally begin the process of changing laws that the government don't want them to change. That is not what Senator Price did today. Senator Price wanted the chamber that represents all states to agree with her to put the question to the Prime Minister. Labor said no, because Jacinta Price embarrassed Labor. The Greens said no, because they don't care about today. They think the only conversation that matters in Indigenous Australia is day one of European arrival. And David Pocock, whether he thought that because his was the only place in the country that voted for the voice, that his vote should go against Jacinta Price. All of it is disgusting. It truly is. Holly Hughes, a Liberal senator, was part of the debate today as well.
Order, interjection.
Child sexual abuse,
Senator
and
Hughes.
You are turning it down. You are turning a blind eye to child sexual assault.
Senator Hughes.
You should be ashamed of yourselves.
Senator Hughes, please.
No, maintain the rage. Because these people have told us month in and month out that they were in it, their hearts were in it. They had to spend $450 million because they made a promise. Here's a moment automatically to begin the process of something practical to investigate how things can be taken better care of. Oh, but we found this one organisation that's already so dependent on federal government money that they said no, so therefore no. Reality was, as you saw in the poison of that senator, it was because they wanted to deny a victory lap of Senator Price. Senator Jacinta Nampijinpa Price will be on this show in a couple of minutes' time.
I just find it just unfathomable still that this has occurred, and the fact that these are Indigenous kids we're talking about. This is the real racism. This is the real racism, where Aboriginal children are left in dysfunctional circumstances because of the stigma of the stolen generation, where we can't even hold a Royal Commission into the fact that they are victims in this country.
Tim Ayres was a union hack, which is how he got his spot in the Senate. Tim Ayres, because of his position as a union hack, has now been elevated to the Assistant Minister for Manufacturing. Just isn't that going well when we now have to import pieces of A4 paper into the country because the Labor Party policies saw that get destroyed around the Gippsland region. He's also the Shadow Minister for Trade. Sorry, the Assistant Minister for Trade. To say what he said today in the Parliament is an example of what is going to happen to Jacinta Price. That all of the people who demanded yes will now punish her because she was able to convince 60% of the country to vote no. Now, anyone who thinks that Jacinta Price can be denied a seat at the table and she will just merely go away, I repeat, look at what happened on Saturday. If they think that they can merely dismiss her as just someone who turns up on Sky News in prime time, look at what happened on Saturday. It was her message, her advocacy, her face on the posters that was there in all of those Labor electorates that voted no, in every state and the Northern Territory itself that voted no. A Royal Commission into this will expose the organisations that are failing and come up with ideas to make sure that kids are safe. For Labor to pretend that it's some sort of intervention on the level of the stolen generation, when remember, some of her practical ideas, and again, all this was missing from the coverage on Saturday night, but when I was in the room with the opposition leader and Jacinta Price and the rest of the media, that very press conference you can see on screen in Brisbane, they said that one of their practical ideas was to have accommodation in all schools where there's a significant Indigenous population, so the kids would have somewhere else to sleep other than potentially abusive homes. That's not a stolen generation, that's a place for them to be safe. Yet the response of Tim Ayres, the Labor Party, the Greens and Pocock is screw you. Jacinta, in a couple of minutes' time on this, before we even get to the debate tonight, I'll give her the floor in a moment or two's time. Outrageous, it truly is. Now, a slightly different way of telling a similar story about how fake this Prime Minister is, from his fake tears through to a lack of actual action. One of my favourite movies from way back when is the comedy The Naked Gun, about a fake police officer who can't do anything right.
In this city, there's crime on every street. But one man has seen enough. He's Lieutenant Frank Drebin.
Whatever scum did this, not one man on this force will rest for 1 minute until he's behind bars. Now let's grab a bite to eat.
He's a good cop who's having a bad day.
And we all need a laugh right now, no matter how crazy the day may be. But I couldn't help but think, I was thinking of Lieutenant Frank Drebin, the main character in that film, today, when Anthony Albanese is doing everything he can in Parliament today to change the subject, to pretend that he's the cock of the walk, he's the one who's got the opposition on the ropes, rather than the flaming bin fire of $450 million, 10 times the amount of money that was there for Alice Springs. $450 million bucks, and nothing has happened. He again reminded me of Frank Drebin in a particular scene when his own levels of disaster led to an even bigger disaster, but there he is standing in the front of the disaster saying, "Nothing to see here." Think of this as the Prime Minister of Australia right now. Trust me, the fire that's $450 million, which we let burn, $450 million of it, well, it's not really our fault. You see, he was strutting around in Parliament today, believe it or not, blaming the previous government for the cost of the referendum at $450 million that he turned from 60-40 yes into 60-40 no.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. Well, the member for Dawson asked about the cost of the referendum, but in fact, half of the cost of the referendum was in the forward estimates provisioned by the former government. That's right. By the former government. Hundreds of millions of dollars. It was there in the Liberal Party's budget, handed down by Josh Frydenberg. But they just forgot to do it, Mr Speaker. Election after election, they went to elections and said they would hold a referendum. They provided funding to hold a referendum.
Seriously. Now, yes, multiple Liberal parties said at some point in time they were going to have some sort of a referendum about recognition. They never did it because they could never find the right form of words, and perhaps they had the sense to know where this would probably land. So the money was never spent. But just because it's written in the budget doesn't mean that it's actually spent. But this idea, don't worry about what's behind me, don't worry about the division, don't worry about the tears, don't worry about the accusations of racism, don't worry about all the stuff that's been said of the past few months. It's the Liberal Party. Seriously? How many times does he think this trick works? This is the guy who said, vote for me, we'll lower the cost of living. It's gone how high since he won an election based off that lie? Let alone the absurdity of I'm a conviction politician, but my conviction doesn't extend to actually legislating the thing that I just asked everyone to put into the Constitution. Madness. Well, again, other examples here. Here was Peter Dutton asking a very direct question. Now that treaty's gone, what about... now that the voice is gone, what about treaty and truth?
My question is to the Prime Minister. Prime Minister, in committing to implement the Uluru Statement from Heart in full, the Prime Minister has previously claimed, and I quote, there can be no real progress on closing the gap and there can be no reconciliation without treaty and truth-telling. Will the Prime Minister be honest and upfront with Australians and inform the House whether or not he remains committed to a treaty and truth-telling process?
Pretty direct question, right? Not if you're this Prime Minister and you think you can just dance around and everyone will clap along because Canberra voted for it, the Inner West voted for it, the Teals voted for it. This is your Prime Minister.
My position is clear about that. It stands in stark contrast with the Leader of the Opposition. Now, it's not clear to me what his position is. It changes all the time. It changed between yesterday and today. In fact, it changed between sunrise and today. More flip-flop than a thong factory.
Seriously. This bloke thinks he's winning. This bloke thinks that he is nailing everything. He thinks that everything he touches turns to gold, and when it turns to poop, nothing to see here. Oh, and just hoping to throw a bone to those who believe that Australia was duped by a whole world of misinformation, despite the fact that they originally were 60-40 yes. They changed their mind. He actually had the gall to pretend that this sort of crap, which was on the internet in the past couple of months, was such a decisive factor.
There was a photograph with the Star of David across 8 Australians' faces. Mark Liebler, Thomas Mayo, Anthony Pratt, Justice Stephen Rothman, Julian Lisa, Josh Burns, Kim Rubenstein and Mark Dreyfus. This is what it said. All of the major creators, financiers and supporters of the Voice to Parliament are Jewish. Ask yourself why 0.38% of Australia's population is using 3% as a battering ram against the rest of the country every single time, full stop. Before that, in the explanation, before the ad, the account said this: just a totally organic coincidence, spelt COHENCIDENCE, for the betterment of Australia, and totally not the latest chapter in the 1,000-year-old hate and attempted destruction of white people.
Yeah, that was the No campaign, Prime Minister. And what about that idiot Minister and Ali behind him? As if that's what happened. Of course, that post is disgusting. Anyone who shared it, wrong. It should have been blasted off all the social media sites. But if you think 60% of the country saw that post, You're more delusional than I thought you were. And we certainly know when it comes to cost of living, he ain't quite amongst us. Now, we, all the way through the many months of the Voice campaign, have talked about the failures of Albonomics, which is all about pretending he's doing something, but really it's only if you're on welfare. Remember, the percentage of welfare in the country has gone up for the first time in a very, very long time of the total share of the entire federal budget. How many times during this campaign did we talk about how cost of living was the number one issue in the country? The number one issue in the country? And just before the actual vote on the weekend, Warren had a great cartoon in the Daily Telegraph, an article that James Campbell had written about polling that showed the number one issue, cost of living. Voice to Parliament, well, nowhere near to be seen, hence why we got the result that we did. And we know what the emphasis of this government has been. Oh, well, they're going to pretend that they split all day. Mate, 8 hours a day, 6 days a week, pounding away on cost of living. They're fighting cost of living at the beaches. No, rubbish. You know what they were really doing. Every MP, from everything that we've shown you over the past few months, every chance they had, it was all about the voice, the voice, the voice, the voice, the voice, the voice, the voice. $450 million piddled up against the wall. And then when they had a chance today to vote for a proper Royal Commission into some of the stuff that needed to be dealt with because the voice was what was needed, nothing. Well, guess what popped up again today? Another poll in, yes, the Turnbull Times, the left-leaning Guardian website. It shows by a huge majority, 74% of people say number one priority of the government should be cost of living. And today the Reserve Bank has come forward and has said that inflation continues to be a massive problem. And what's one of the biggest things that currently is concerning that almost meant they put up interest rates last month? Oh yeah, exactly what we said on this show, petrol. Petrol, which is up close to 14% on where it was last month. Now, if the Prime Minister wants to, again, continue this dog and pony show, this line of lies about doing something about inflation or doing something about cost of living, he should cut petrol tax now. He can do it, 25 cents a litre tomorrow. That can go for 6 months. It costs $3 billion. That's his own numbers out of his own idiot treasurer's mouth. He's got $20 billion more, but of course they're really trying to go for a 2-year surplus so they can buy everyone off in the lead up to another election because they're the greatest of all time. All they do is manage the politics. They do not change anyone's life. And even when they take credit for it, like we showed you last night, $56 a fortnight to people on unemployment benefits. Oh, gold star for you, mate. Cut petrol taxes. You could do it. You've got the money to do it. You could do it tomorrow. You could extend it for 6 months or even 12 months if you actually were serious about cost of living. But we know you ain't, for the most obvious of reasons. Now, quickly to the United States. Been a while since we've talked about Donald Trump, and there has been a big change in the world of Donald Trump, where one of the many cases, one of the many judges that he's going up against at the moment has issued a partial gag order, meaning please do not talk about the judges, the court, essentially the case or many other things in it, or as explained on PBS in the United States today.
A federal judge in Washington imposed a narrow gag order on former President Donald Trump in the election subversion case against him. It bars Mr. Trump from targeting special counsel Jack Smith and his team, as well as court staff and potential witnesses. It does not prevent him from criticizing the Justice Department.
His response? Get ready for me to go to jail. He is literally leading with his chin now. Let's see what happens next.
A judge gave a gag order today. Did you hear that on speech? Which I believe is totally unconstitutional what she did. A judge gave a gag order. A judge doesn't like me too much. Her whole life is not liking me. But she gave a gag order. You know what a gag order is? You can't speak badly about your opponent. I am willing to go to jail if that's what it takes for our country to win and become a democracy again.
And he read that off the teleprompter, which means it was planned to be said. All right, Jacinta Price, one of the great warriors and a person who's been able to change our country's mind over much of the narrative that has been built for a while. Of course, we want to recognise her incredible achievement on the weekend, but let us focus right now on what happened in the Senate and the disgraceful behaviour of some Labor senators. We spoke just before we came to air on her motion being defeated.
Today I tried to move an urgency motion to call upon the Prime Minister to hold a Royal Commission into the sexual abuse of Indigenous children, to audit Indigenous, the many services, and to work in a bipartisan manner to bring about common sense, practical approaches to solve some of these issues. That's what happened today, and I was just absolutely appalled at the excuses and the flippant way in which some of the Labor senators behaved in response to this call. And Labor, the Greens and Senator Pocock all voted this motion down.
This is extraordinary. I mean, it obviously very personal as a way of getting back at you because you embarrassed them, you embarrassed their plan, and their plan for a new place for people to sit around and talk about what happened a couple of 100 years ago, as opposed to potentially what should be being done now, a place where people would be able to wear it like a badge and go on Q&A and do endless interviews on Radio National. You're talking about a practical thing here. Now, I want everyone to go and have a look at the live stream that I mentioned before, because you get into some detail here. But again, I don't mean to re-traumatise you because it's a difficult day, but you're talking about family members now that on multiple fronts have been on the wrong side of this stuff. You mentioned it in the Parliament, yet these people basically gave you the middle finger and giggled while they did it.
Yeah, it felt like it felt the same as being a victim and going to seek help. About being abused and then being denied. That's how it felt. I had informed those that had asked me to do this on their behalf, survivors of abuse, to push for this. I have to inform them now that their government is not interested in hearing their stories, understanding how they can improve the lives of those that are still in situations where they're being abused now, and where we can prevent this into the future. That's what I have to now go and tell them. And I just find it just unfathomable still that this has occurred, and the fact that these are Indigenous kids we're talking about. This is the real racism. This is the real racism, where Aboriginal children are left in dysfunctional circumstances because of the stigma of the stolen generation, where we can't even hold a Royal Commission into the fact that they are victims in this country, the highest rates of experiencing the highest rates of sexual abuse. I mean, Senator Cox from Western Australian communities have had the highest rates. Roebourne community was once named the sexual abuse capital of the country, and yet they still want to refuse these children a voice.
On the overall result, we see the Prime Minister, sort of, as I showed a bit earlier in the show, playing the Frank Drebin, the police squad guy from Naked Gun. Nothing to see here, while there's a giant fire behind him. Yesterday, I listed all of the different things that the government was patting itself on the back about in the federal budget that was extra money that they were throwing in towards Indigenous issues. Well, of course, $450 million has just been piddled up against the wall. I really like the suggestion about corporates that spent whatever dollar they spent on the Yes campaign, now spend it on a serious donation with somebody that can help tomorrow. But the Prime Minister thinks that, he deserves a gold star because he made a promise, Jacinta. So it was good that we went through this, despite the fact that he never changed the question, he never split the question, he never delayed the vote, despite the fact that he knew for months this thing was hitting a brick wall. What do you say to the Prime Minister and his attitude that, I'm a conviction politician, I did the right thing?
Well, if you actually have to state that you're a conviction politician, evidently you're not. He's made several promises. He's made promises to reduce people's power bills by $275. He's not kept that promise. You can't just simply state that you made a promise and that's why you went through with it. You have to be a bit better than that. You have to determine whether this is a good decision for the country or not. You have to balance all of that up. And as for the corporates, well, I think the corporates, given they care so much about Indigenous Australians, should now apply pressure on the Prime Minister to hold a Royal Commission into the sexual abuse of Indigenous children. And absolutely, I concur with Senator Karen Little that they should now double their efforts and put money into worthwhile, common sense initiatives, and we can certainly point them in the right direction instead of making excuses for the fact that they supported the referendum that Australians didn't want.
We know that 60% of the country said no, but 60% of the country is not following you on Facebook. Let's change that right now. Follow the Senator on Facebook, because not only will you see every little thing that she's doing, and it's not little things, every big thing that she's doing, plus she has live reactions after things of like what happened today. Follow her, show support, because the second she says, hey, here's a petition, here's a number to ring, here's a place to email, do it, do it, do it. You did your bit last Saturday, now you do your bit tonight, tomorrow, next week and every week after, because as we all know, this lady's a star. We love you, Jacinta. Keep fighting, keep fighting, keep fighting, but have a good sleep this weekend.
Thanks, Paul. Let's keep going, Australia.
We will. We love you, darling. All right, her link is up on our socials in preview of tonight's show. Barnaby Joyce, Pauline, Hanson. No sooks, no lefties tonight. Nigel, Farage as well. We're just getting started. So much to talk about, including the media people who say it was all about the dumb people who voted no. Way to... Common sense is in Canberra right now. Sure, it's not in the majority in the Senate or the House, but it certainly is on this show. No sooks, no lefties. The wonderful Pauline Hanson and the equally delightful Barnaby Joyce, both here. Lovely to see you. Geez, you both look like you had a good weekend. Now, what about this? As you know, a lot of analysis of the smarty pants people from the yes bubble, well, of course, they say that the great Australian public that went from 60-40 yes to 60-40 no apparently got dumber in the past year or so, not smarter about the idea being put on the table. Roll the tape of some of the analysis of why Australia voted the way it did.
In those inner, wealthier, educated electorates, we're seeing the yes vote hold up quite well.
Areas with higher levels of education more likely to vote in favour of the voice.
Streets versus the elite. Those wealthier, more educated suburbs are more likely to vote yes.
All those dummies, Pauline. Apparently 60% of the country.
Aren't they a bunch of sooks, as you say? They are a bunch of sooks. Paul, let me just tell people, OK, we've had 45 referendums since Federation 1901. 8 of them have succeeded. So what are they saying? The people who rejected the other, from that, they're all dumb?
Yep.
So...
we've got dumber as the years have rolled up. We were dumb in 1901,
yes, I know.
Dumb in 1923.
We've got more educated people these days.
Yeah, dumb in 1988.
That's their excuse with all this, Paul, isn't it? Okay.
But even that, like on this one, Paul and listeners, there's only 12. I'll give you another thing. There's only been 12 referendums where they've lost both a majority and every state and one territory. And this was one of them. Yeah. It was a hubristic, divisive debacle. It was an absolute debacle. And I just want to take you through something. Let's go through this. Remember at the start, remember Shaquille O'Neal? Shaq? Oh. They started the referendum with an African-American basketball player who advertises for betting agencies.
Yeah.
And then it started badly, and then they went to Coles and Woolworths and the banks supporting them in a cost of living crisis. Who do you think people are really, affectionate about? I tell you what, it ain't Coles and Woolworths and the banks. And so it tailed away a little bit in the middle. And the end, of course, they had the absolute train wreck, which was the vote. So as Blackadder said, it started badly, tailed away a little bit in the middle, and the less said about the end of it, the better.
Yeah, no, Australians were very smart here, Paul, and the whole fact is, who let them down? Marcia Langton, Noel Pearson, Megan Davis, Lyndon Burney, and, Thomas Mayo. And Megan Davis. So they're the ones who actually tried to hoodwink the Australian people. They weren't dumb because they woke up to their lies, and that's why we got the vote that we did. So good on Australia. You knew what the hell was happening. They were trying to hoodwink you.
Also, perfect example, right? Again, last week the symbolism of the Prime Minister crying in the dirt of Uluru. But the reality was when he was confronted today in the Senate by Jacinta Price, who clearly, definitively, absolutely won the debate about where the country should be, who never hid the types of practical solutions that she wanted. The first chance they got to spit in her face and say no, and you're going to be punished forever because you denied the first line of Albo's bio in the great history and pantheon of Labor leaders. What about what happened in the Senate today, Pauline, where they just crushed? Do not pass go, do not get $200. Not the legislation to set up a Royal Commission, but a request to set up a Royal Commission. What arrogance from these people who were crying in the dirt a week ago.
Paul, they have no interest in really digging into the problems that we have. They outlined all the problems that is happening and they thought we needed Voice Parliament to tell us what was happening. The fact is that went down 26 to 31 votes. David Pocock was part of that vote. I don't know where Jackie Lambie was and Tammy Tyrrell. They weren't in the chamber at the time, but they could have been paired with the Labor Party. The fact is that, you know, I've been calling for audits. I've actually named people and organisations where corruption is happening. They refused to allow me to table the documents. Jacinta Price is spot on the money here, which I've been calling for the last 27 years for audits to be done. If you do that, you're a racist. They don't want to find the answers. The people, I tell you what's happened, Paul. This referendum has woken up the Australian people. They are now asking the questions about where has the money gone, and they have every right to ask where it's estimated about $40 billion a year has gone onto this Aboriginal industry gravy train, and we need to actually find the answers. They are too gutless to do it and the Greens. So if you keep voting for Labor and the Greens, this is what you keep going. You're not going to get accountability for your tax dollars. They'll keep shutting the doors in your face. You will not know. They're propping up these moderates, these ones, purely for the vote. And their socialist, communist views on our country and our democracy, you won't get a look in.
But Pauline, tell me what you really think.
No, that's why we love her, right? When she's on here, she lets the restrictor plate her off, and it's all Pauline. We love it, just as we do with you. But Barnaby, again, right? You've written books, right, about the weatherboard and iron, right? About the people who are just the great plotters of Australia, right? They're not simple, they're not dumb, they're not stupid. They are just the people who just power on, right? That's all they do all the time. But the system views those people to shut up, pay your taxes and vote the way they want them to be, as obedient as Toto's dog, Toto, the Prime Minister's dog, right? But surprise, surprise, every now and then they're not, right? And when they bite hard. But again, let's talk here about, you've been sitting in the Parliament the past couple of days, Prime Minister trying to sort of pretend nothing to see here, Frank Drebin style, no fire behind him, no $450 million. Oh, now they're focused on cost of living. They won't do anything about petrol prices. And even when they try to talk about what they're doing, they list off things like, whoa, $56 a fortnight. It's $56 a fortnight for people on unemployment benefits. So even the ones they're pretending to be helping, let's be honest, it ain't the money that's going to change anyone's life. These people only ever care about the front end of the plane and the bubble that clapped them along. Everyone else, shut up and pay your taxes or vote for us or we'll take the welfare away.
Well, what we've seen, Paul, is this referendum defined Australia in two groups. It wasn't actually Aboriginal Australia and white Australia or other Australia. It was between ACT and Teal seats and the rest of Australia.
Yep.
And yeah, I do talk about Weatherboard 9. I talk about Weatherboard 9 because those people who are just so patriotic, they just do their job, they just go to work, they pay their taxes, they serve in our defence forces, they serve in our fire brigades, they serve as ambulance drivers, they take their kids to school, they teach them manners. And that's basically the Weatherboard 9 is what makes our nation great. And now we have other smart alecks on other, university-educated inner suburban smart alecks who say, oh, well, the reason you voted no is because you're dumb. You're a dumbo. You're a dumb. And well, it was a train wreck. The referendum was an absolute train wreck. And, I'm going to always stand with the Weatherboard 9. I'm going to stand with those people because they're the ones who actually make our nation what it is. And we have so many issues before us. And you talked about cost of living. Look at them. I'll tell you the next issue that's going to bite people on the backside. You watch this. I know a little about lots, but by gosh, I know lots about politics. The the wind factories, the solar factories, the transmission lines, I know 3,000 to 4,000 people when I was at Nelson Bay demonstrating against this, the local Labor members not turning up, the Stephen Jones down there in Wollongong saying, don't worry, we'll have a bit of an extension into the review from Minister Chris Bowen. By God, isn't he popular? Minister Chris Bowen. You watch this one. I can tell you, they've lost so much paint over this referendum. We haven't, Did they lose the election? No, they've lost a lot of paint. But if they get this one wrong, they're gone.
No, I agree completely. We talk about political capital, bark, paint, all the rest of it. Again, who knows what that next election's going to be? But Pauline, I think people, they wake up a couple of times en masse during a government's term. They have woken up to all of those things that Barnaby's talking about. And again, the lovely teals, everything must be changed for the environment. But will they put one wind farm on their seats? No, it's all for the bush.
Middle Harbour wind farms. Let's do it.
Yeah, look, they won't. And, you talk about who's dumb here. If you really look at the teal seats, who are the upper class in the northern Sydney suburbs and some of those seats in Victoria, the ones who actually voted no, I'd say they're the ones who are dumb. Because you know what? They vote on emotive issues and not really understand the whole point of the referendum. See, Australians were watching and trying to understand. Listen, I spoke to a lot of people and they said, well, look, can you explain it to us? And those people listened because they wanted to make their vote count. So they knew what the impact would have on them by putting it in the Constitution. The ones in the suburbs, these teal seats, they think they're above it. They think they know everything. And the fact is, they don't know, and that's why they voted the way they did. It was all based on emotion. And they think, we're helping the Aboriginals. Most of them, I can guarantee, have never been to an Aboriginal community, wouldn't have a clue what the hell's going up there, would not even house or feed or an Aboriginal, wouldn't have even have them in the home. And I guarantee
but
that.
They've got all the art, and they've got the documentaries. They've seen it all. Lad and lady, I'm sorry, we've got Nigel Farage standing by, so we will continue the conversation many a time between now and then. Thank you very much. All right, Nigel Farage next. No sooks, no lefties. This Tuesday night here on Paul Murray Live. Plenty more to talk about. And a big shout out to our mate Kyle Sandilands in a moment here on Sky News. Nigel Farage is the Brexit leader. He's the man who is, of course, a freedom fighter. You can find him on GB News. You can see him each and every week right here on Paul Murray Live. Great man. Your thoughts on Australia voting 60-40, every state bar the bureaucratic bubble of Canberra. No, hell no, no thank you.
I remember the morning after the Brexit referendum 7 years ago, and I stood on a green outside the Houses of Parliament and I said, this is a victory for the little people, for ordinary people, for decent people, against an out-of-touch political and media class and bullying big corporate businesses. I think my response to the referendum result in Australia is exactly the same, and the fact that Canberra voted yes makes the whole thing sweeter and better, but it just shows you they are completely out of touch. Well done, Australia. Brilliant.
Do you have any warning to those that were part of the no machine about how the wider machine comes after you, after you've had the embarrassing victory?
Yeah, I mean, look, they did it to us with the Russia hoax. They did exactly the same thing to my friend President Donald Trump. They never, ever accepted the result. But I've just got a slight feeling that perhaps this is different in Australia. I think the scale of the defeat, the fact that all of the states outside that little Canberra bubble voted in the way that they did, I think it's going to be very difficult for Albanese to really recover from this and to really go on the attack. And I think, the classic thing they would do is to say, look, Australians were hoodwinked by racists and bigots. I just don't think it flies. And I also think it sort of kills stone dead the idea of a referendum, a constitutional referendum on the monarchy as well. So, no, I think you've won your victory. I think they will struggle to come back from this one.
All right, let's talk about Israel. So much happening, everything from Iran saying that as soon as tonight they may well end up doing something in a preemptive fashion, people stuck in Gaza, more information coming out about what actually happened in Israel, and Joe Biden heading in the next couple of days.
Yes, I mean, Joe Biden's position is very odd, isn't it? You know, strong speeches now in support of Israel and their right to defend themselves. And yet, it's Joe Biden who, as Vice President of America, was part of the Iran deal, which freed up tens of billions of dollars for Iran on a promise they would not pursue the nuclear program. And what did they do? They pursued the nuclear program and had the cash to fund Hamas and Hezbollah. So I have to say I do find the Biden visit, you know, if you drill down into it, really somewhat contradictory. As far as the situation on the ground is concerned, look, you know, we all know what's happening in Gaza is very, very bleak. But I think we have to recognise that Hamas are ISIS. They're one and the same thing. And when you get the noises coming from Iran, when you see strikes now coming out of Lebanon, when you see problems reoccurring on the West Bank, you know, you realise that basically Israel is now in an existential fight for its very future, surrounded by people who hate not just the state of Israel, but actually the religion of the Jews. This is a very, very bleak situation that Israel finds itself in. And I know that two wrongs don't make a right, and I'm worried, as everybody is, as to what may happen in terms of the civilian death toll in Gaza. But they have to do this. They simply have no option if they are to survive as a country and, frankly, in many ways, as a race in that part of the world.
Now, the best part of, 10 years ago, the New Zealand went down the long and wokey road. Thankfully, they found a way off it on the weekend.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Jacinta Ardern was the most right-on leader in the whole of the Western world, and happily, her reign is completely over. New Zealand's experiment with quite radical socialism has firmly come to a close with a solid Conservative victory, smaller parties like Winston Peters doing well. Also, common sense has returned to New Zealand. All in all, it's been a pretty good weekend down under, hasn't it?
My oath, it has been, absolutely. And the New York Jets, they won from behind this week, so it was a very good weekend. The three-peat, in fact, for my good self. Thank you, mate. Appreciate it. We'll talk to you soon. All right, Nigel Farage, we'll talk to him again this time next week. Now, shout out to our dear friend Kyle Sandilands. If you were watching the show last night, you know what he did. If you weren't, we'll relive it all with a little spin next. I was blown away. There are just a couple of mentions on television and we were able to raise easily the $40,000. That means that a special bit of equipment is going to be there for Mildura Hospital to take care of sick kids in their earliest days. The Humpty Dumpty Foundation are the ones that will organise it after your incredible donations. And as we were doing all of that, the great Kyle Sandilands, the king of breakfast radio around the country, well, he was just watching as he always does and he decided, bugger it, I'm going to chip in. He told the story to 1 million people today on the radio. How's this for a bit of karma spreading nice and wide?
I was watching Paul Murray's, his show on Sky News. So he was on there last night saying, hopefully by the end of the week we'll have raised enough money to buy the little kiddies incubator to keep kiddies alive because the hospital doesn't have one.
But I want to make sure that a kid makes it through those first few days. Help me, help them.
And he said, after last night, we've raised 5,000. I thought, 5,000? I got 20 grand on me in my pocket. So I just texted him and said, bro, put me in for 20K.
He's a good man. He's come good. And I tell you what, altogether, it's more than $100,000 that we're going to be able to give in for Mildura. Just a couple of mentions on the telly. That is phenomenal. Now, we're going to do this each and every month. We won't set the mark at 100 each and every time. It's just going to be one piece of equipment in each town that we go to when we do our town. This Sunday is Mildura. If you'd like to join us in the audience, send me an email. ourtown@skynews.com.au, ourtown@skynews.com.au. Here is the late debate, and one of them's been drinking.